Thank you for bearing with me. Sorry I'm a bit late today. So welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's really lovely seeing everyone. My name is Councillor Tabby Joy. I'm chairing this committee today. So this meeting is actually being streamed live to the Cheltenham Borough Council YouTube channel. If you ask a question at this meeting, then you'll be deemed to have consented to be filmed. Potential use of these images and sound recordings for broadcasting will be used for training purposes. So we're not expecting a fire alarm at this time. If it does sound, then please treat it as a real emergency. So please make your way to the nearest fire exit. You could just use those green signs up there. I'd really like to welcome today. So this is a really cool meeting. We're going to be, I'd like to welcome this Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance and Governance Committee to tonight's meeting, because we really appreciate their engagement with the local enforcement plan. And I'd also really like to welcome Rhiannon as well, because unfortunately we're losing Charlotte, who has been an amazing staff member for Democratic Services for many months, and we've really enjoyed having her, but really excited to have Rhiannon on board as well. So welcome, Rhiannon. So we have, just moving on to the agenda, on item 1, we have Councillor Chandler, Councillor Barrell and Councillor Beale, who've extended their apologies and can't unfortunately make it here tonight. I hope if anyone's feeling under the weather, they recover really swiftly. Councillor Julian Took has kindly offered to act as a substitute for Councillor Barrell. So I think that brings us up to speed on item 1. Item 2 is any declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations they need to make at this time? Cool. Okay, taking that as read. So item 3 is minutes of the last meeting. So that's on pages 5 to 12 of modern.gov if you need to check it. So the minutes of the 25th of March 2024 were circulated with tonight's agenda, and I've not been made aware of any amendments. Does anybody have any suggestions they'd like to make for the minutes of the last meeting? Cool. Okay, all good with that one. So I move that members approve the minutes of the meeting held on 26th of February. So members of Overview and Scrutiny, if you'd like to vote on that, please. Just a show of hands is good. Cool. Perfect. That's carried. Thank you so much. That is perfect. Cool. So I'll get to signing the... Sorry? It's okay, don't worry. I took it as consensus anyway. Literally causing democratic crisis, that's fine. So we have, moving on to item number 4, public member questions. It's always nice to have calls for actions and petitions, but at the moment we don't seem to have any. So again, just clarifying that it'd be really cool to have those if anyone sees fit. So at the moment on item 5, I'd like to call for a cabinet briefing from Councillor Hay, who's our leader for council. Just if you have any updates on Councillor Hay, that'd be really cool to hear them now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously August was relatively quiet, and I certainly took the opportunity to take a couple of weeks completely off. And thankfully for me, where I was staying, there was no internet, so I had no excuse to even try. But there's anything that I was going to mention, there was a few things I was going to mention, but they're actually on your agenda. Obviously, the Cheltenham Borough Homes transition back in-house has all gone smoothly, and thank you to members of ONS who sat on that group and assisted in that transition. The only other one that's really to mention, to note, is that we are very close now to putting the municipal offices onto the open market. I'm sure you will all see that in the press in due course, and also you will have seen quite a bit in the press recently with lots of questions around the High Street and what's happening there. I met with the BBC today because they've been very insistent on inquiries, and actually, given that we do have an official court date, it's on the court list, therefore it's a public document, that will be published. But what I have said is that, due to the fact that the council is taking action, there's no further comments can be made because obviously it's we're in litigation. So those were the two things I wanted to update, unless Scrutiny have got any questions of me. Thank you.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much. Does the scrutiny group have any questions for Councillor Hay at this time? We all good? Okay. Thank you so much. That's absolutely perfect. So we're moving on to item 7 tonight, which is the Yubico annual performance report. So our objective here is to consider the annual performance report and just examine for any emerging trends or issues that we should be aware of over the next year. I'm actually quite excited with the work plan that we've been developing lately, because I just want to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks actually to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for working so closely with us on developing the work plan. It's really been great getting your ideas and just kind of getting your feedback about what you'd like to see. So I really welcome your taking ownership over this and just kind of making sure that you feel satisfied with the things that we've been looking at and that we're due to look at. So at this time, and I'd also like to express particular appreciation as well while I'm thinking about it, just for councillors who've been asking questions in advance, like an amazing job there. I would just like to invite the Yubico representatives, Rob Heath, who's the Director of Operations for Yubico, and Marvin Langston, the Head of Operations for Yubico, to address the committee, if that's okay, please. And I'd really like to say thank you for coming tonight. It's really good to see you. Just checking before we start, does Councillor Day, because you asked some questions in advance, are you satisfied with the responses that you had, or do you have any further follow-up questions?
I've got a couple of follow-up questions, but they were great. Thank you very much for the very complete answers I got. I'm happy to ask those after the presentation.
Okay, that's perfect. So are you happy to take the presentation now and we'll take questions afterwards? Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
So we obviously circulated the report beforehand. Has anybody got any questions on the report that they want me to answer?
We're okay to just kind of, if you want to present it now, then, you know, we can just respond to it. Sometimes it's useful having our memories refreshed a little bit on the night. Thank you.
That's fine. So we've been working on improving health and safety, not across, well, basically across the whole of Yubico. And we've been running what we call a Get Out and Look campaign to sort of reduce reversing accidents and vehicle accidents. And we've seen a decrease in vehicle accidents across the Cheltenham contract in this financial year, which has been really good. Missed properties, again, have reduced. We've introduced a new in-cab technology, so it makes reporting easier for the guys that are doing the collections, but it also helps customer services have the evidence to hand. If a bogus missed bin comes in, they can have a photo and they're able to sort of fight it a little bit more. Again, which reduces the sort of carbon footprint of us having to go back to something that we know we've already been to. I know we had a question on the container delivery request, and apologies, the food waste containers have been double counted in with the recycling containers, so it did look like there was a massive spike on deliveries, but that's been addressed and rectified, so the next report we get, that'll be getting taken out. But again, we brought the container deliveries back in-house. We used to outsource that, and we're starting to see a lot faster delivery times, and the volume as well has sort of increased on where we were when we used to use the external company. Curbside waste collected in tons. Again, we've seen a sort of a decline in recycling slightly, but this seems to be across all contracts within Yubico, not just Cheltenham specific. And we don't know if it's down to, we're putting a bit of it down to the cost of crisis thing, where people are holding on to things a little bit more, maybe being a bit more sensible with food, etc. But we've also seen a reduction in the collection of refuse, which is good. We're not sending as much to the incinerator. Garden waste subscriptions continue to grow, so it's generating a really good revenue in for the council. my guys on the ground working a little bit harder to get that in. So again, it's all positive with garden waste. I broke down all of the fly tipping requests that we've had come through the in-cab technology system reported, and it sort of averages about 68 a month. It's not we're getting 68 every month, it is an average figure. Again, we're working with enforcement and Karen to sort of address what we can do to find the perpetrators. Complaints and compliments. Everybody likes a compliment, but with complaints, they are all thoroughly investigated, and we do try to come to a sort of amicable resolution with the resident that made a complaint. And to be honest, 8 out of 10 times they're sort of satisfied with the answer that we give them. Because again, using the in-cab technology, we're able to a lot of the time now evidence certain things that we were unable to evidence a few years ago. The absence slide, again, we've seen a little bit of an increase on absence. We've been trying to tackle this as an SLT and an ELT by bringing in sort of mental health first aiders. We have noticed mental health seems to be one of the bigger risers within the company. And again, it's, you know, we sort of did a little bit of work behind the scenes, and we don't know if that's down to the cost of crisis living. People were sort of starting to worry about providing for their families, etc. Again, like I say, we've managed to put things in place that there are helplines and revenues that they can come to speak to us, and where we can, we signpost. And then the final slide is the fleet management slide. So we operate what's known as no license because we operate HGV vehicles, and you get a green, amber and red. Green's good, obviously, it's the traffic light system. Again, we've remained as a company within the green zone, so that stops us getting stopped as many times by the DVSA, etc. And we have an internal fleet audit team that come in and they check all our paperwork and make sure we're adhering to these sort of rules. And Cheltenham are one of the top hitters with 98.3%, which is no small achievement to get. I think the average is around about 94 or something like that. So yeah, you know, I'm comfortable where the management team on Cheltenham are with managing the vehicle fleet stuff. That's a whistle-stop tour of the report, if I'm being honest. So if anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to take.
Thank you so much. That's really comprehensive. Thank you. So Councillor Day, should we go back to your questions? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your report. And I mean, there's a lot of very positive stuff in there, particularly on the incredibly high percentage of collections made and the health and safety stats, which is always great to see those in a very good place. With the food caddies, could you just confirm that sort of mistake only affects the numbers in the report and the council hasn't been kind of overcharged or double charged for those, please?
Yeah, so I got the team, what we call our alloy team, to run the figures again for me. And yeah, it was only the food caddies that had been double counted, but no, there'd been no overcharge to the council.
Just a second question, sorry if I may, is on the rate of sickness absence, which I think in your report comes at 6% across the year as a whole. Now, earlier today, I checked some ONS figures, and the latest available kind of national average across all businesses, which is 2022 figures, is 2.7% on average. So the figures in the report are kind of more than double the national average. And to me, that means that a lot of activity, you know, particularly around grounds maintenance and street cleaning by, you know, the information in the report that could be happening were that sickness absence to be lower just, isn't happening. And I know you mentioned in your report, but I just wondered if you had any comment on that, whether you feel the sickness rate is kind of higher than for your industry, what you would expect, and whether you think the measures that you're taking, will be successful in bringing it down. Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, would you mind just popping your microphone on, please?
Sorry. Yes, so the trend is across the whole of Ubico. We've put an action plan in place to drive that down, and we've had a look at what's causing that. There's no real reason, but when we look at sick notes and so on and so forth that we get now, back a couple of years you had to go to a doctor and get a sick note. You don't do that now. You go online and you get a sick note, and then you just ring up and say, my shoulder's still hurting, and you just get signed off again, which it isn't the best. I'm not saying they're all like that, but it's a lot easier to be signed off. That is across the whole of our industry, and as you said, across the nation as well. And it is a big jump on over double across Ubico. So we've put an action in place, and we're working with HR. We've recently employed a head of people, and she's been targeted working with myself to look at the long-term sick, try and get those sick people back to work, or come to a conclusion that they're not fit to come back to work, and replace them, once it's all been agreed. So there is a problem, but we have got an action plan, and we are looking at it now.
Thank you so much for that. Councillor Chelland, do you have any follow-up questions?
Thank you very much for answering the questions that I sent beforehand. I just had another one, if that's okay with you. With the increase in fly tipping requests, which was quite considerable, wasn't it? 24.4%. I suppose my concern is that it's going to justify people's claims that the reduction in the opening hours of the Swindon Road facility would increase the fly tipping. So I just wondered what kinds of requests are they? Is that a cause and consequence thing? Maybe it's not, maybe it's just coincidence, or people are just more alert to reporting fly tipping. And I suppose what mitigations are being put in place? I mean, you've mentioned a bit about that, but...
If it's okay with the chair, I could answer that one for you. So Ubico aren't tasked with actually doing any enforcement on fly tipping. We just ask them to go and pick it up. The cabinet member responsible for the service area, including the one responsible for fly tipping, and I are going to get together with enforcement teams to actually have a look and see what the statistics are telling us. Do we have enough data to understand, are the fly tips different types of fly tips than we might historically have had, and therefore can we draw any conclusions like you're suggesting? One thing I do know is that we've been more careful of late, where we've got different IT systems now, at making sure we are capturing data, so more people are being encouraged to report things. And actually, therefore, I think the numbers of fly tips that might otherwise have been sort of hiding under hedges, etc., are actually being reported now. So we've got a bigger picture of exactly what's been going on. Equally, actually, where we've got more enforcement officer time wanting to actually do something with fly tipping, they are actually making sure that they investigate as much as possible. Now, we haven't got systems fully integrated, so we need to sort of do a bit of a double check on different sets of data. However, I think we're in a place now that we can really understand what is going on. And I'm not sure I can concur that it's necessarily can be said to with the household recycling centre hours, because what I think Ubico teams are reporting to us is not necessarily the numbers, it's actually the volumes of those individual ones. So you might get a number of different tickets in our system for the same fly tip. And in our statistics, it looks like perhaps you've got triple what you actually have got out there. So that's why we need to do a bit more work and integrate that data a bit more thoroughly than we have.
Councillor Telford.
Just to add on to that very slightly as well, we've obviously had, not to disparage all of us, but we've obviously had 2 elections this year, and it gets people out and about and busy and knocking on doors, speaking to all the residents. And in that, you might get a report of something that they say, oh, there's just something, can you go report that? And then the other councillor candidates and everything will do the exact same thing. So you end up getting multiple reports for the same things and more reports than you might otherwise get.
Sorry, Councillor Allen, if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. Would it be appropriate to comment on the budget in relation to the annual report and the increase in fly tipping? Just a question to the chair.
If you've got a question, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I noticed that the budget margins are slim at the moment with 188k underspend, but still underspend all the same, which is, great to see. But I have noticed with the rise in collection and fly tipping and, of waste and refuse, you are still reporting an underspend in those areas. I mean, I think, if I'm not wrong in saying, it's a 413k underspend when you account for fuel, tyre prices, supplies and services, as well as waste shipping charges, income and support services, etc. I mean, going forward and, with a new budget, do you think there'll be more room allocated for things like fly tipping and refuse collection in future? Because, I mean, do you see these things being short-term problems, or do you see these things being things that will pick up after, well, I mean, if the economy picks up, but also, maybe this is just a once in a sort of lifetime kind of blip?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, the data that you're looking at is for last year's annual report, so as of the 1st of April into a new year. So the council sets the budget. So there'll be conversations as part of our contract sum setting with UBICO around, and some of the questions that were asked by committee members give the answers to the number of staff, and the questions around absence are very pertinent, and as much as if there isn't an agency budget to backfill staff, obviously it's less man hours to actually deliver those services. So the increase in fly tipping actually is obviously more problematic when you haven't got as much staff. So one of the conversations with cabinet members will be around what funding levels do we want to be putting in, or can we afford to put in? And one thing I should point out to members is last year there was a savings target attributed to the UBICO contract, and this year the savings target is £500,000. So it's a difficult financial position. So there's some conversations to be had really with UBICO's expertise around what their teams can actually sensibly deliver, what the council can actually afford to pay for it.
Councillor Allen, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just to follow up from that as well, I noticed that you've got a new fleet of hydrogen-fueled vehicles as opposed to the previous diesel ones. And just a question firstly, does this imply that there are an entirely new fleet of vehicles, including the 8 electric vehicles that you've got, but also, 3 electric vehicles that you've got currently? And if that's the case, do you anticipate lower costs for breakdown and maintenance as a result?
With regards to cost of breakdown of electric vehicles, it's a bit of an unknown. So we've got the history of what it costs to run a diesel vehicle. We're new, and some of the vehicles that we've got across UBICO were early adopters. So we don't have that that information to share. We do have industry stats that we share, and the day-to-day running costs of electric vehicles is much less moving parts. Should be cheaper, but we can't say we've experienced that yet because we haven't had those vehicles for that amount of time.
We also kept them a year longer.
Oh yes, sorry, in your existing vehicles, we kept a year longer because you was unsure what route you wanted to go, and older vehicles are dearer to maintain.
If we can take Karen Watson's supplementary, and then if we can ask Councillor Pinniger to ask a question next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to point of clarity, it's not hydrogen fleet that we've got, it's a hydrogen treated vegetable oil. It's a drop-in fuel, so it's actually the same internal combustion engine that used to run diesel that can actually take the HVO, and it's much cleaner. So there's some answers in the report there on that one. And it wasn't an entirely new fleet, so there's a fleet replacement plan. So vehicles are over a period of time replaced after, so they have a lifespan, usually it's about 7 years for refuse collection vehicles and the recycling vehicles, and they're getting replaced on that time period. So it's not a completely new fleet, so bits of those vehicles are being replaced as we go along within the budget.
Thanks so much for that. So do you have another question? Perfect, go ahead.
Hello, and thanks for the report. Now, this is for the last financial year, and it mentions in the second to last paragraph, expertise still in short supply. We're trying to grow our own, senior people are retiring, and we're short of resource. And I think I see this locally in waste bins not being emptied as often as they would be otherwise. I wanted to know what your plan is to address that, and just flesh it out a bit for me. And there was something else, but I'll come back to it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we see the experienced people, that it shifts. So a little while ago, we had an issue with HGV drivers. We resolved that. That was around pay in the local area. We are now seeing an issue of HGV drivers again. So all HGV drivers have to have what you call a driver CPC. It's a 5-year, they have to do so many hours training in the 5 years. The first 5 years is coming to an end now. So a lot of drivers that are getting close to retirement are not bothering to do their CPC, so they can no longer drive. But 2 areas that we're really struggling with in Yubico, across the whole of Yubico, are vehicle technicians, so mechanics for the workshops. We're struggling to attract those, and grounds maintenance staff. So we've, again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a head of people in, and we have been for the last couple of years. We grow our own with apprentice, so that's been quite successful in the vehicle maintenance sector. So I think across Yubico now, we're currently on 5 or 6 apprentices that are in their apprenticeship. 5 actually, because we've just lost one. And with grounds maintenance, we're making contact with local colleges, Hartbury and in Cirencester, the Agriculture College, see if we can tie up to them. We are struggling to get people to do apprenticeships in grounds. It's just an area that's not, people don't take it up anymore. So we're looking at what we can and can't do. We found with the grounds, we train the people to a level to use chainsaws and mowers, and then it's quite easy for them to go and start their own little business by mowing lawns. So we do lose a lot. I suppose the people that are retiring now have been with us a long time, and they get benefits such as a council pension benefit, which keeps them there. That new employees don't get that, so getting through the staff turnovers higher than it was. Across the whole of the business, though, I believe our staff turnover, though, they stay about 6 years on whole, but there are pockets where we have got the problems, and we're identifying what those are and see what we can do with them.
In my day job, I've had a similar problem of attrition, people leaving. And one of the issues that we identified was that it was the only way to move on in the job was to move through the management chain. Not everybody wants to do that. So we put in place a competence matrix so people can move on in their salary without having to become a manager, which I just throw that out there as an idea, something that we've done quite successfully.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll take that away. We're just drawing up those competencies ourselves now for different, what the outcome of that would be for us, I don't know, but I will take that to head of people and put that suggestion forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we've got we're trying to stick to a tight schedule today. So I'm going to assume we don't have any further questions that we can ask at this point. But presumably we can follow up with you if there's anything else we'd like to discuss. Thank you so much for coming today. This has been really, really good. And it's good hearing from you as well. So we'll move on to item 8, if that's okay, in terms of the local enforcement plan. So thank you so much for Yubico for coming, and for Councillor Taylor for the spin class. So our objective with the local enforcement plan is to pre-scrutinise and contribute to the local draft enforcement plan prior to it going to Cabinet. So this is one of the biggest changes that we've been making with our work plan for overview and scrutiny recently, is we would quite like to have a look at Cabinet decisions and just try and be more proactive. Something else that we did learn from the CBH transfer last year was very much that, you know, we want to anticipate things coming up and just try and be more responsive and proactive instead of reactive. So I'm really, really excited to be working on this now. I'd like to invite Chris Gom, who's our Head of Development, Management, Enforcement and Compliance, and Tracy Birkinshaw, who's our Director of Planning, to address the committee, please, if that's all right. We really appreciate having you here. Thank you so much. If you'd like to introduce yourselves and just the work you've been working on, please.
Thank you, Chair. This item, as you've said on the agenda, relates to a proposed new local planning enforcement plan. So just to be clear, this does relate to planning and no other regulatory functions of the council. So the purpose of the plan is to set out in writing, really, for the benefit of members of the public and developers, and really anyone who has an interest in the planning enforcement process, our overall approach to planning enforcement. So to summarise, that includes what we can investigate and what we can't in a planning enforcement sense, what our priorities are in terms of how we prioritise different types of breaches of planning control. The plan includes our target timescales for dealing with different types of breaches of planning control, and those timescales are linked to the priorities or the priority that's been afforded them. And then really what our overall approach is in terms of how we will resolve those breaches of planning control. Once it's been established whether there has been a breach of planning control, the plan then sets out what our approach will be, and there's an emphasis on informal resolution as the priority or the preference, and formal resolution, formal action as a last resort. The current version of the plan was published in 2014, so the draft document before the committee today is a completely or an entirely new document. It's not an update to the 2014 plan. Given the passage of time and changes in legislation and so on over the last decade, it was felt necessary to produce an entirely new document from scratch, really. So, as I was saying, the plan sets out our overall approach, and I think section 3.4 of the report really summarises it quite neatly, really. And I'll just pick the main points out of that section there. And it says the draft plan explains how we will approach an enforcement investigation once its priority has been set and once the initial investigation has been undertaken. So we will follow one or more of the following four options. So the options available are to do nothing, and that would typically be where there's been no breach of planning control, or the infringement is of such a minor or trivial nature that there's no public interest reason to pursue it. The second option is to negotiate a solution, and that's our preferred go-to course of action, and we would employ that option, or we would use that option where we can informally agree a cessation of the harmful activity and deal with it that way. The third option is to invite a retrospective application to regularise the breach. So that's really in cases where the breach of planning control, a breach has occurred, but the breach of planning control is acceptable in planning terms. And so it would be, in terms of tidying up the paperwork, that would enable us to regularise the breach through the grant of retrospective permission. And then the fourth option is formal action. And as I've said, that is our last resort, and we would follow that option where all other options have been exhausted. So where we've failed to negotiate a solution, or we simply can't negotiate a solution, or where retrospective permission can't be granted, we would then take formal action. And as I've said, the draft report sets out the main forms of formal action which are available to the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That's really comprehensive. Tracy, would you like to contribute anything, or are you happy?
Use that one. I don't think there's much to add to what Chris has set out, but just to add that it is a discretionary service of the council. It is something we take seriously as a council, and clear messages need to be sent in the appropriate ways where there has been issues that need to be resolved. And obviously, this report takes us forward in terms of formalising and updating where we are.
Thanks so much. That's brilliant. So if it's okay, I'll just note down that I want to talk to you guys, but does Councillor Day or Councillor Chellan have any further questions following what you've... Okay, perfect. Councillor Took, if you'd like to go first, and Councillor Penniger, if that's all right.
This is one I feel very strongly about. I respect and believe in our planning officers and our planning committee. I think they do a difficult and often thankless task, but their judgments are key to the economic and social development of our town, as well as critically the protection of our nature and our heritage. Their judgments need to count. The planning compliance function and its capacity and willingness to take legal action should be a potent deterrent to any cowboys, chancers or rule benders who think they can build exactly what they want without due regard to the law or the instructions of our planning officers or committee. Regardless of how often it is used, the threat of action should be significant. The planning compliance function should be serving as a powerful deterrent and so the protector of our beloved town. We should not be playing down the likelihood of taking planning compliance action. Gives me no pleasure at all to reject this paper. In my opinion, the paper is ill thought through and its very existence is self-defeating to good planning in this town. The fact that the paper is being shared publicly only amplifies its damage. I also note that the paper doesn't cover the responsibility of owners of listed buildings to maintain their properties and the responsibility of planning compliance to monitor or take action if the owners of those buildings allowed them to fall into decay. Section 215 notices are the responsibility of planning compliance. We have 2,600 such buildings in Cheltenham, many more than Oxford City, for instance. As a council, we have an onerous responsibility to ensure these buildings are maintained, not just because they are key to the heritage economy of this town, but because they are the cultural inheritance that should be passed on to the next generation. Why has this been forgotten? I don't accept that lack of staff should be the basis for setting strategy. To my mind, this document is the equivalent of the police saying that they're unlikely to take action on burglary because there aren't enough policemen or police officers. My final point is addressed to anyone in Pittville who may seek to ignore the judgments of planning officers or the planning committee and apply for retrospective planning permission. Unless there is a really good reason, and there may be, but unless there is a really good reason why the original planning stipulations shouldn't be applied, I will be objecting to retrospective planning applications and will do my utmost to ensure those applications go to planning committee and are rejected if necessary.
Did you, Councillor Took, did you have a particular question with
Just want to.
So that's on the record? No, okay. Okay, well, thank you for contributing that. Councillor Pinniger, if you'd like to ask any questions.
I also have some reservations about this document. I mean, you have documented what you do now, so maybe this isn't the place to evolve the service or move it forward. But the first paragraph talks about managing planning enforcement proactively, and from there on in, it waits for someone to report a planning infringement before it does anything. Now, proactive to me means going out and finding planning problems. I've reported a few things in my area myself, and as a councillor, they tend to come back to me. People tend to work out who I am or who reported them. So it would help me enormously if planning enforcement actually did a regular tour. It only needs to be once every year, 2 years, but would have a look around the neighbourhoods and see where the infringements were. That would, to me, be proactive, which is from the MPPF. I also have to ask Karen, sorry, not Karen, Tracy, is it, you just said this is discretionary, this whole thing is discretionary. We don't have to enforce planning. That seems slightly strange. So just wanted to confirm that, and you nodded, so that's okay, that's fine. Then in the decision whether or not to act, I've noted that we don't at any point come back for political guidance, so we don't ever come back to members to say, or cabinet to say, where should we go with this? It just seems to run through, and it says the question of whether or not it's expedient to act is at our discretion. Does our include cabinet members, or is it just the team? Those are my questions. Thanks.
Would you like to respond to this, please?
Thank you, Chair. On the proactive point, I think it's a fair point. I think there is a case to be made that planning enforcement could be more proactive in how we deal with breaches of planning control. I think in reality, obviously the overwhelming majority of the complaints or the work that the planning enforcement team receive are complaints from third parties, generally members of the public, to breaches of planning control or perceived breaches of planning control from their neighbours or something that somebody's seen in the town. And that probably comprises 90 to 95% of the work that the planning enforcement team deal with. And I think that will probably always be the case, because those complaints will always, and those reports will always come in to the enforcement team. I think going forward, when we're fully staffed, there is the opportunity for the monitoring of compliance with planning conditions, for example. I think there's some more work we can do on the monitoring of compliance with Section 106 agreements. In terms of sort of patrolling the town to sort of look for infringements of planning control, I think that would be something that would be very difficult to do. And it's not something, as far as I'm aware, that any other council does. And what we find is that, in fact, where a breach of planning control is easily detectable, that those complaints do come forward to the council, to the enforcement team. So whilst it's something that in theory could be done, I don't think the value of doing that would really be worthwhile in terms of the resources that it would take for the enforcement team. But I do think, generally speaking, that we can be more proactive in terms of condition compliance and dealing with Section 106 compliance on the key issues, on the important conditions and clauses in 106 agreements that need to be complied with. In terms of the other questions, I mean, yes, it's a matter of fact that planning enforcement and decisions about whether action should or shouldn't be taken, that is a matter that's delegated to officers. And I mean, clearly that's something for members to consider, really, in terms of, you know, the scheme of delegation and what should or shouldn't be delegated to officers, or what should sit with elected members. I think that probably deals with all of your questions, Councillor, unless I've missed something there.
I've just got a couple of points to make, Chair, if that's okay. One of the things, Councillor Pinnigo, that we've been talking to other parts of the organisation about, so for example, our neighbourhood team. So we do have members of staff outside the enforcement team who are eyes and ears on the street. That might be housing officers, it could be environmental health officers, it could be the neighbourhood team. So as part of the work we've been doing on the local enforcement plan is also about how we can kind of link into that kind of wider network of eyes and ears. Certainly, I think, you know, in an ideal world, wouldn't it be great to kind of walk street by street the borough and look for these infringements? But the reality is that, you know, I think you would rather us be involved in dealing with the cases that are with the council and that have identified those infringements. Certainly we receive queries from a whole range of people. That could be businesses, it could be neighbours, it could be visitors to the town, and all of that becomes our workflow. One of the other things that we've worked really heavily on with Planning Committee is about making sure that any conditions we apply to a planning application is enforceable. So, and we've tested those quite hard, and we make sure that we constantly refresh them, because sometimes we will be in a situation in Planning Committee and something will come out of debate as part of Planning Committee, and members of the Assembly, I'm quite keen to have that conditioned. And that's fine as long as it's enforceable. So what we've done a lot of work on is actually driving out conditions that aren't actually truly enforceable. And that will be a continued work stream going forward, which is why you often have officers testing members in Planning Committee to say, but how are we going to enforce that? And that's a team effort that we need to do within that kind of Planning Committee piece as well. I think those are the points. Oh, the final point I just wanted to make is that as part of the work we've been doing on the enforcement plan is we have had a member engagement session as well. And some of those members are here today, and I don't know whether they might want to comment on that. But that was a positive session that we had with members. And albeit there has kind of been some issues with resourcing within the team. What I would say is that's been a national issue. It's not specific to Cheltenham. It's quite a hard specialism to recruit into, but we've got plans in place within which to do that. But, you know, we want to get the right members of staff in the right places. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was just wondering, did you have a point that you wanted to raise?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to wait until the members of the committee had finished before I just made a couple of points. So I'm quite happy to wait until everyone else has had a chance to speak.
Okay, so I'd like to ask Councillor Allen if that's okay. I would like to make sure that audit, since they've taken the time to come, if they can make any contributions or suggestions. So Councillor Allen, is there anyone in audit who'd like to? So Councillor Willingham, that's perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to draw in attention to 3.4, bullet 3 of the report in particular, which was the stage after trying to negotiate a solution being to invite a retrospective application to regularise the breach if considered applicable. Now, I understand the logic of this being an informal thing, and I appreciate that the approach here is to be remedial rather than to be punitive. But the big question for me is, where is the cost of this placed? Because if it's on the council, and I'm aware that, you know, to bring a retrospective application to planning committee is quite cost intensive, and given the resourcing challenges we're currently facing, I mean, I really do think the cost should be on the developer to secure the application and to fund the resourcing of it. I mean, either perhaps through implementing a small fine or perhaps even a small contractual agreement on the unapproved development should a solution not be forthcoming. Because I'm conscious that, you know, the approach is to be more informal, but at the same time, this is in the public interest, and we're trying to find remedial solutions in the public interest. And is it not in the public interest to have a fully staffed council that can fund this type of enforcement? Because else we're sacrificing the public purse in favour of rogue developers and costing the council as a result. And so I do think a fine or a contractual agreement could also help to incentivise the less resource intensive, more remedial solution negotiation option of the plan as well at the beginning, to try and avoid the fine in the first place.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we invite a retrospective application in circumstances where there's been a breach of planning control, but the breach is at a level of harm or that isn't problematic, or the breach is in compliance with planning policy and the development plan ultimately. So in those circumstances, because the role of planning enforcement is, as you say, remedial rather than punitive, our objective in that situation is to regularise the breach, and the grant of retrospective permission obviously regularises the breach. That doesn't mean to say that it is certain that it will be regularised. Some retrospective applications are refused, but the purpose really is to regularise the breach, and it's in the applicant's interest to do so, because often these issues arise through the sale of land and property, and it becomes clear in the legal searches, the particular element of the development doesn't have planning permission, and that obviously causes a huge amount of issues for the developer, for the landowner. So what we do find is these issues do tend to be self-policing to an extent. In terms of levying a fine, unfortunately, we don't have the legal authority to do so. What we can and can't do is set by the legislation, and that there's no ability to fine a person or a developer who's done something without planning permission. Later on in the process, if we get to the point of issuing an enforcement notice and there's non-compliance with that enforcement notice, then it becomes a different matter, really, and that there is the option to prosecute. But in the first instance, if they submit a retrospective planning application and that's approved, that is the end of it, really, from a development management point of view.
We're just on the edge of running out of time, so if I could take a question from Councillor Willingham, and if you also wanted to make a final statement at the end, go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. I've got a couple of observations on some of this. So in terms of planning conditions, I really hope there will be some feedback on quality of planning conditions. I will read you one that has been the bugbear and I still haven't got it sorted out, which was: the development hereby permitted shall not be occupied until details of the external lighting to serve the new pedestrian access to the Honeybourne line have been submitted to and approved by writing by the local planning authority. They were submitted and approved, and the lights are there. There's no condition requiring them to be turned on at night, and they're not, the last time I checked. So you have a situation where we've required someone to install lights and haven't required them to turn them on. My take on planning enforcement is we should have gone after that for non-compliance and we shouldn't have signed it off. It's pretty obvious lights are there to be lit at night, and if they're not, that does seem something that should be enforced. So I really hope we will have that some more going around the loop of conditions that are not enforceable or don't work or are badly worded. I'd like to ask about dropped curb enforcement, because there are roads where you will see that a good number of the houses have done the correct thing. They've applied for planning permission, they've paid for their dropped curb, and then one of the neighbours has just decided, nah, we're not going to do that. We're just going to take the hedge down and we're going to drive across the curb, and the car will be trashing the curb all the time. And it's about the equity of some people, the good people paying. Is that enforceable through planning? And will that be done? There's a question of how we will deal with the conservation areas outside of the town centre to make sure that they're protected as well. So things like the Poets conservation area, which is in the county council division I represent. There's a question about section 215s for derelict land to make sure that they can be followed up, because I don't know about other members, I have a good number of bits of land that have been derelict or in an awful state for quite a long time, and the planning enforcement has sort of brought forward a planning application and then nothing much has happened and the land is still being fly tipped, people are just dumping stuff there, nothing's happened. The post-apocalyptic derelict scrapyard that looks like it's a scene that would be a good backdrop for a horror movie is still doesn't seem to have had anything done about it. I really think it needs to be clear in the document that members set the policy and that planning enforcement is officer-led without fear or favour. It doesn't matter, there should be no political influence as to who is subject to enforcement. I don't care if it's if it is the richest person in Cheltenham, whoever that is, and they breach planning. I don't care whether it's a member. I don't care whether it is the poorest person. It should be this. We set the policy. It should be without fear or favour. And I think we need to have that in there because there should be no political meddling in the use of enforcement powers. And I really think that needs to be clear. that puts us all above accusations of anything like that. And the final thing, and I don't know whether it is missing or whether it needs to be somewhere else, but certainly for one of the properties in the ward I represent, it was the subject of an arson attack by the person who, or an arson by the person who lived there. It's taken forever to go through planning enforcement for various reasons, and there doesn't seem to be any capture of things like compulsory purchase as the final outcome for this. But I don't know whether that's a planning matter, but I'm pretty sure it was served a 215 notice, because the empty burnt out shell of a house isn't something that most of the neighbours want to look at. So hopefully you can either take those into account. I don't necessarily need answers, but if you have some, that's great as well.
Is there anything in any way you'd like to respond to that?
Just a comment, if I may, because a lot of what we're talking about today comes into that kind of public interest test and how that applies. One of the things which we might want to think about adding into the document before it gets signed off with Cabinet is the Code for Crown Prosecutors has quite a useful section which is about the kind of public interest test, and of course it's useful to think about that. So the spirit of what's included in our local enforcement plan picks up a lot of what's in there, but of course it's always about use of narrative and language, isn't it? And it's quite nicely summed up in the code of practice. So what we might want to think about, because of course where cases do end up in court, we will be tested within that context as well. So it's really important that where we're investing in those leading to prosecutions, we do so in those where we feel really confident we're going to be getting a positive outcome of it. So we'll take that away and we'll have a conversation with the Cabinet member, because obviously the Cabinet report is in its journey at the moment to the Cabinet date. But that could be some additionality we could add into the report to add a bit of clarity around the public interest test, if that's helpful.
That would be really good. I would like to echo just concerns about antisocial behaviour or anything relating to arson attacks, just because a lot of these situations tend to deteriorate significantly, often just while we're occupied with other things. I understand it's very challenging for us to be proactive, but it is imperative that we don't let situations escalate, because they can become very serious. I know that we are taking measures in a very joined up way to kind of just ensure that antisocial behaviours and like aggressive, like serious illegal behaviours are kind of being, so much of that really does come down to a lot of planning interventions that ideally we may be able to adopt. I'm just quite conscious that in my own ward of St Paul's, there has been several unoccupied derelict properties that have been very badly managed. If we were able to make some early onset interventions and potentially avoid kind of exploitation or any kind of criminal behaviours occurring on site, I'd really, really welcome that. If our planning team are under-resourced in any way, I personally don't want to bring any judgment into that. I just want it to operate effectively. So if there's any way that we have a strategy that could include like law enforcement or any other agencies, I personally would really welcome that, and I would really appreciate that being potentially considered as part of this. I think that would be the feedback that I would offer. I am quite aware that this is obviously something that people are very passionate about and interested in. So before we close off, is there any other sort of recommendations that people would like to make at this time? Councillor Pinniger.
It's actually a point of order. I did submit questions for this and the previous report. And somehow I didn't send them to the right people.
I'd like to apologise for that, sorry.
No,
this is
it's my
actual
fault. I sent them direct to Chris, I think.
Okay.
So do I just include Beverley in the circulation? Is that how it works?
Send them to Dem Services inbox, yeah.
Yeah.
Democratic
So,
Services. Thank you.
as a point of clarification for anybody who would like to submit questions in advance, then yeah, by all means send to Democratic Services. We'll try to make more routine reminders as
And
well.
then the next point of order is we've all made comments here, but because this is the first ONS meeting since the election, I'm not entirely sure how those comments then get reflected in the report, in the procedure,
I mean,
policy strategy. Sorry.
They'll certainly be minuted. You know, do you have any contribution you'd like to?
So obviously, as Tracy alluded, the paper is very much on its journey at the moment on towards Cabinet. So what we'd normally expect to see is I think this time, in addition to the Cabinet report, there's a paragraph in there that then says that it's been considered by ONS and a summary of the points that were raised by the committee, so that when Cabinet are making that decision, they can make sure that they've got a fully informed picture. So it gets put into the report that goes on to Cabinet about all the things that have been raised today, which will be obviously taken from the minutes.
I think something that has somewhat haunted me recently, when we did our overview and scrutiny training, like as part of the induction, our trainer was very much sort of holding up for reproach the kinds of overview and scrutiny committees that would say, okay, that's great, we've learned a lot, this has been really interesting, let's move on. I think that we need to, like, with respect, I would like concerns like this to be kind of taken relatively seriously, because, you know, of course, we are speaking to local residents and we get a lot of information from them, and we feel passionately about this a lot of the time because our residents feel passionately about it, and it's one of the most visible things that we tend to do. And you know, there's quite a lot of expertise a lot of the time in this, so you know, you're right. I think it is valuable for us to be able to input into it and just kind of we are overseeing and scrutinising. You know, this is what our remit is, and I'm really hopeful that this should be taken on board. Do you have any other kind of responses that you'd like to contribute? Like, if there's anything that this has kind of made you reflect on, or anything that has made you remember anything that you may be working towards on this? I just want to give you the opportunity to respond.
Certainly, we'll go away after tonight and reflect. I think adding in some wording around that public interest test, that's my kind of big takeaway today, because, you know, members, although not using that language, have touched on that in various reflections. So definitely take that away, and obviously we'll have a conversation with the Cabinet portfolio lead in terms of, in advance of Cabinet, how we take that forward.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, everyone's had the opportunity to speak, and I had an idea it might be a bit of a robust debate with quite interesting questions. I think just about everything that I had noted down in advance of this meeting has been addressed in some way or discussed. I would like to start by thanking the officer team for putting the report together in the first place, and I think it's important to tease out, the last time we looked at this was 2014. It's a long time ago. The world's a different place now, and I think it was right to start again rather than to make amendments to the old report that we were working to. It has been brought up that this is, and it's clearly stated in that report, it is a discretionary service that we as a local authority offer. I have to say, in all honesty, I'm quite surprised by that, but it is a fact. It is a fact. So we have to be realistic. I would say the report in the current stage, or in the current condition it's in, is realistic. And the other thing I wanted to say was, we are not alone in Cheltenham as having resource issues in appointing suitable officers to the right roles, and the whole country is facing that at the moment. So I think that does need to be maybe not taken into account, but certainly considered and acknowledged. We will take away some of the things that have been brought up today, and yes, this has to go to Cabinet, and it's signed off at Cabinet level before anything else goes on. So I just think I'd say thank you to everyone. You've all obviously read the papers, and some of you have been quite passionate about it, which is good. That's what we're here for. But we will take it away, and we will discuss some of the things that have been raised tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for your contributions today. We are in some ways this is going to be slight variations on a theme continuing into item 9, which is the progress report in respect to the 2023 plan and peer review. So this is pages 37 to 44 of your modern.gov agenda. So this is actually receiving the progress update in respect of the steps that have been taken to implement the recommendations of a recent peer review. So continuing with Chris Gorman, Tracy Birkinshaw, who have kindly submitted information for the previous item. If you have anything you'd like to bring up in particular relation to item number 9, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce the report, really. This item on the agenda relates to, as you've said, a progress report in respect of the recommendations of the 2023 planning peer review and other improvements generally. Members will note from the report that the peer review made 12 key recommendations in terms of improvements that could or should be made to the planning service. It's also the case that when I started at Cheltenham in November last year, I also, over my first few weeks, identified a number of essential improvements, some of which overlapped with those identified by the peer review team and others which didn't. So my focus for the first few months was really to implement my improvements and then move on to those recommended by the peer review. And there's a summary of both our progress in terms of the peer review recommendations and the issues that I identified set out in my report. There's still a fair bit more to do. I won't mention everything, but we're working on a new local validation checklist at the moment, which will make it clearer what documents developers need to include with a planning application. We're continuing a transition to Enterprise, which is an electronic case management system, which should significantly help or improve or streamline, really, how we process planning applications. We're also reviewing the planning performance agreement process and reviewing Section 106 monitoring processes, as we touched on with the previous item. But the recommendations, as I say, Chair, are set out, or the summary of how we've addressed those recommendations to date, are set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That's really good. Do we have any questions to kickstart discussion? Councillor Allen, go ahead. Chris, sorry, would you mind just switching off your microphone, please? That'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's good to see that there's been substantial progress made in the report. And I think, as has been recognised both in this item and the previous item, that resourcing is a significant challenge, both at this council and across the nation. I think we should potentially expand on point 9. I think it's good to see that the Planning and Parish Council Liaison Group has been suggested. But rather than it just being committed to parish councils, I think it also should extend to neighbourhood forums. I think if we create neighbourhood forums, particularly in unparished areas, we're going to help reduce the stress on the council and help empower residents to organise and set out their planning visions and priorities. And I think, where parish councils have provided organisation in the suburbs of the ward, and they tend to be the typically more well-off suburbs of the town, I think having neighbourhood forums could represent those areas that are particularly deprived. I'm thinking in particular parts of my ward which are laying unparished, but also parts of West Cheltenham where I live. And I do wonder, when planning applications are potentially breached, if it's possible if a neighbourhood forum could potentially step in as well, linking back to the previous item. And I think such a suggestion would have a significant contribution, not only to the the planning side of things in the local area, but also to the local economy as well.
Would you like to respond or anything?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree with what Councillor Allen has said, really. That's something I've been sort of dwelling on myself for the last few weeks, how better to engage beyond the sort of traditional contacts outside of the council. So that's certainly something we can take away and reflect on and give some further thought to.
I just have a brief question, if it's okay, and I'll come to you, Councillor Day. It's actually just having noted that the Local Government Association conducted a corporate peer review. Is the LGA offering you any support in like sort of case studies or any sort of avenues that may encourage like local and public engagement? Because I know that that's something that they've raised with us in the past. Have you explored any avenues of support that they may be able to offer us in order to deliver that?
Thanks, Chair. So we've got an open access really to the Planning Advisory Service to help us. So it's the way in which these type of peer reviews happen is they don't just come in and then leave. There's an ongoing engagement with them. So certainly we can kind of, well, what we do is reach out in any event thinking about engagement. But what I would also say is I've also recently been part of an LGA peer review team. So I went to another council on the other side, being part of the peer review team. And that council was doing some quite interesting things around public engagement. So certainly I've taken some learnings because it's not all about looking, you know, at what they're doing and then leaving it at the door. We bring back best practice as well back into the organisation. So certainly that's an ongoing theme. Just picking up Councillor Allen's point as well is I think the neighbourhood forum point is really important because of course we've got a neighbourhood plan going through the motions in terms of Leckhampton and Warden Hill, and in West Cheltenham it's likely that that will be progressing through to neighbourhood plan process as well. So finding a forum. I do think actually there's a wider point there, though, Councillor Allen, because obviously we have a functional group called the C5 group, the Cheltenham 5 Parish Councils. So I'll take that away as a kind of question to talk to the communities team, because it may be that we've got an approach that actually, where we've got best practice, that we can just expand a little bit further. A final point I wanted to make on that point was around the planning weekly list. So the planning weekly list is available. It's quite a dry thing, I'm afraid, but it is provided in a ward by ward basis. So anybody, for example, living in your ward, West Cheltenham, can have a look at whether it's Hester's Way or St Mark's or whatever it might be. So it might be on that weekly list. If someone is particularly interested, like a neighbourhood forum, then they could sign up to receive the weekly list and it'll drop into their inbox. I know that's a tool that members find really useful. And again, if you're not interested in other parts of the town, that's fine, but you can zoom in on what's of interest to you. So as ward members, I'd encourage you to make that known. It's obviously on our website, but not everyone finds their route into the website. So as ward members, you know, we very much welcome you being that kind of postbox as well.
Thank you so much, that's brilliant. Councillor Day, if you'd like to go ahead. Councillor Chelin, if you would like to go next, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I meant after Councillor Day, thank you.
I guess this is probably more of an observation than a question, but it's based on, you know, my advance question, which you very kindly answered, and I'm very grateful for that. So from that answer, your kind of targeted headcount is 12, and you're currently operating at 8 permanent and 1 contractor. So, you know, that's a big shortfall to where you are to where you would like to be. And for me, you know, as I think's come across tonight, what you do is very, very important to members and certainly, you know, my residents, and I'm sure everybody's residents. So what I'd like to say is clearly there is a national shortage, there's a national issue, and I think it's important that Cheltenham kind of wins that competition for the available talent out there so we can be delivering the effective service that we all and our residents want to see. And really just to say that, you know, whatever is required to kind of break down those barriers to achieve that, you will have my full support, you know, to do that. So thank you for your reports tonight. Thank you for your time. And just to make that clear, but I don't think there was a question there, just a statement.
And would you like to give any response to that? No pressure either way, but okay, perfect. Councillor Chelin, if you'd like to go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry, mine was just a very small thing. Following up from what Tracy said, I've got residents' associations in my ward, which isn't parished, and they have a key person who receives the weekly list, and they discuss it at their committee meetings, if necessary, and that sort of thing. So there are those mechanisms which are in place. Thanks.
Really good advice, thank you so much, because I know unparished wards tend to get a bit underrepresented on those things, so it's a good thing for other people to know if possible. Councillor Took, if you'd like to go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. I do note your problems with recruiting. Could you spell out what innovations you've been taking to recruit better, retrain people better, reskill them, and to retain staff better to deal with these things? Because I note that, for instance, the compliance officer position has been free for probably 2 years now at least. So what have you been doing, please?
So we've had a range of interventions that we've been working on with that. So we've been working really closely with our human resources team. We have been very much focusing in two ways. One of working with direct recruiters, so essentially headhunters. So we are very active on things like LinkedIn. We're very active in the professional press. But the way in which individuals are choosing to engage with the job market isn't down the traditional route. So, for example, the last time we put a job in the professional press, the Planner, which is the magazine that goes into every chartered member's inbox, we received zero response, and there's a cost. You know, there's the cost of putting that into into that kind of publication. So the approach we've been going is kind of twofold, really. It's around making sure that the messages are attractive in terms of, one, Cheltenham being a good employer, two, the opportunities that you get through being part of the Cheltenham family as an employee of the Borough Council, but also what you can drive as an outcome in your role. And I think that's really fundamentally important. We've been doing, with every contractor relationship we've made sure that we've had feedback from that contractor. And that's been consistent. So a number of things have happened. So there's fewer and fewer young people coming to choose these types of profession generally. So there's what are we doing about that? So we're having a live conversation with our HR team, which is about grow your own. So in Cheltenham, we've got a good reputation of growing your own. So a number of our senior planning officers, for example, came through actually being an administrative process, coming in at the front line. But we've had fewer of those coming through that have wanted to then make a transition into roles. That's a personal choice, which has mean we've had to go out to the market. But we're looking more closely at apprenticeships. So we've currently redrafted some of our job descriptions, so they're not actually officers, but we're looking at graduate levels coming up. So we offer a career graded opportunity. So what you'll see in some of our posts now is that you'll see them spanning one or two job profiles. So it's not just a planning officer, it's actually starting at a much lower grade. So actually we're giving people the opportunity to not necessarily just come to Cheltenham in a role with a fixed salary band, but they've opportunity to then grow into that role rather than leaving for another job elsewhere. Cheltenham's base, although we're not fully stocked in terms of personnel, we've actually got probably one of the most stable planning teams within Gloucestershire. So we don't actually get a huge amount of movement. It's in where people have moved elsewhere, they've had people move countries, etc. So the strategies, to answer your question, Councillor Took, is around making sure we've got the HR strategy right. We've been doing a lot of benchmarking across other local authorities to make sure we've got our salaries correct. And there's an ongoing planning resourcing conversation with the Chief Executive at the moment, recognising that the challenge that we have. So it's about listening. It's about being creative in the way the messages land going forward as well, and being flexible as well. So we now don't have set periods. So normally we would put an advert out and in, I don't know, a month and a half time, we'll look to interview you. So we interview as we go. So if we get an interesting looking candidate, we don't want to lose that candidate. So we will interview as we go. So again, we're trying to be more dynamic with our HR processes. And obviously we've brought our HR back in-house. So that's been a real opportunity to kind of do some of that refresh as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Councillor Hay, did you? Of course, go ahead, Councillor Took.
Well, thank you. I just noticed one thing you haven't talked about, and I'm sure you've just forgotten to do so, about how it's uniquely exciting working in Cheltenham because we have the most fantastic heritage and listed buildings that, from a planning perspective, make this town absolutely unique. So I'm sure that's coming through in your advertising, but I wanted to point that out.
Would you like to just...
It's just very briefly, I think it's really quite important. There's quite a lot of the meetings that I attend. So, so district council networks, the local government association, lots of leader meetings and also with some of the government bodies. And what is absolutely clear, and I think it's really important that that members really note this bit, is that actually across the board, we sit there and say, what can we do? Why is it that local government is not attractive to individuals to come and work with? And rather like Tracy, I've done peer reviews, I've been to different webinars, I've been to different workshops, to just sit there and try and brainstorm as to what we can do to encourage people to come and work for the local authority. And one of the things that, we've notably undersold is the benefits of actually coming to work for a local authority, i.e. a local authority pension scheme, which in of itself is enormously valuable. But it's not ever really been a selling point, if you like, to encourage people to come. And I think one of the other areas that, we've expanded on is actually looking at how very much working more closely with further education and with the university, because the universities and all further education, they're really keen to keep that homegrown. So it's actually about working more collaboratively and strengthening the relationships that we have in terms of taking on youngsters at that graduate level, or so degree graduate students that want that experience. We talked earlier on about, you were talking about ground maintenance. There's that conversation that needs to happen, or it doesn't need, it is already happening, is the conversation with Hartbury, for example, because they run ground maintenance courses. So it is a live conversation that has, over the last 3 years, has become more and more challenging to entice people to come and work for local authorities. I just thought, need members to feel informed enough to know that it isn't Cheltenham, it isn't anything that we're doing wrong, it is a national issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that. So we probably better wind up discussion on that unless anyone has any yeah, if we move on to item 10, that would be perfect. So this is feedback from other scrutiny meetings that have been attended lately. So actually only one of the 3 committees have actually attended. They've actually only met at all. So the Gloucestershire Economic Strategy Scrutiny Committee, they're going to be holding an inaugural meeting following a reshuffle on the 20th of September. So that's going to be in a couple of weeks. And then the Gloucestershire Police and Crime Panel are going to meet on the 6th of September. So we haven't yet had notes back from them, but that's totally fine. Be ready for next meeting. So
I think David's indicating he wants to speak. It's not on the committee, so it's up to you, Chair.
I don't know.
I can give you a verbal update on the police and crime panel. I was there, if you would like.
That would be really cool. Yeah, would you mind? That'd be great. This is a sneak preview.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the first item on the committee was a discussion about the unrest, the potential civil unrest, and obviously people were very thankful for the reaction of the police. We were glad that Gloucestershire wasn't actually a victim. There wasn't any disorder in Gloucestershire itself. The police were obviously on standby to provide mutual aid to other authorities. and there was a good discussion about being careful about rumours of disorder being circulated and fake news and what have you, because obviously parts of Cheltenham did close early on that day. So there's obviously there's a lot of feedback, not just for the police, but to do strengthening communities so they're less vulnerable to being exploited by people. The real meat of the meeting was the medium-term finances. From that, there is some rather disappointing news that PCSO recruitment has currently been paused. So PCSOs that leave the force are not going to be replaced. So at the moment, the numbers will diminish. And it's unclear how long this pause will last for. There's also some quite concerning finances for the long term. So the proposed finances are 31st of May 24. The reserves were set at 25.2 million, and the proposal for 31st of March 28 is that the reserves will be down to 9.1 million. So the reserves are falling year on year by quite a significant amount. Furthermore, at the start of the 24-25 year, borrowing was 20 million, 20.488 million. And by the end of the 27-28 financial year, it's scheduled to go, or it's planned to go up to 51.784 million. So borrowing is going up and reserves are going down, which is obviously not a position that anyone was particularly. There was a lot of concern about that. We've been told it's borrowing to fund IT, and there were some questions about the IT, how long the borrowing is for. We're told it's relatively short-term borrowing, and we've been told that the IT platform is a tried and tested thing. So rather than it being a Birmingham City Council, let's push us towards Section 114. We are hopeful that isn't the case, but I think there's going to be a lot of questions to the Police and Crime Commissioner about the finances and the medium-term financial plan. There was also a lack of a debt repayment schedule to show what the drawdown looks like. So again, we've asked for that. You know, we know what our debt repayments look like 50 years out for our borrowing. I think it's important we understand what the Police and Crime Commissioner is intending to do. There was then a briefing note of the Police and Crime Commissioner activities, which is there. People can read it if they wish to, and a report from the Chief Executive with a look at some of the laws that were in the King's Speech and what was coming forward. There's things that you would obviously expect. There's quite a positive piece of work on tackling violence against women and girls. There is a police race action plan, and there's progress on that. And in terms of the relevant bills, things like Martin's Law, which is the Terrorism Prevention of Premises Bill, was also discussed. And I think for large events in a festivals town like Cheltenham, some of the work associated with Martin's Law may well be of relevance. I'm not going to go into detail in a public session further on that. So that's a sort of, hopefully, a little bit of an overview. Thank you, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really good. Would you be happy to potentially take questions if anyone has any? Does anybody have any questions regarding that, or are we fairly happy? It's really comprehensive. Thank you. We fairly happy? Oh, Councillor Allen, would you go ahead?
Sorry, just a very quick one, but this is quite shocking news that there is such a surplus in borrowing and such a deficit in, like a decrease in actual sort of reserves. I mean, was this not considered before the Police and Crime Commission, the Police and Crime Panel met? And if so, what were the plans proposed to tackle this?
So I think it has the figures have changed from the budget. So I'm a reserve member. I'm a reserve on the panel, so I'm not always there. What we were told by the finance officer was that the borrowing was of the good borrowing type, i.e. they are trying to borrow in the way, so if you consider it in terms of your personal finances, borrowing and taking up borrowing like a mortgage is considered good borrowing because you've got a tangible asset at the end of it, whereas borrowing to gamble on the races in Cheltenham is obviously bad borrowing because you probably will have nothing at the end of it except more debt. So the way that it was presented to us was that it was good borrowing, and there is it's supposedly over a shorter term. It's not necessarily 50 years borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board. However, we haven't had that confirmed by the graphs and the charts and what have you. So there will be future questions, and hopefully that will come back. And obviously, as we move through the year, the Police and Crime Commissioner will be looking to set the budget so that they can set the precepts in time for our council tax. And hopefully at that point, there will be a much more detailed MTFS, just as we have an MTFS. So I think this is a work in practice, in progress. You have to have faith that the officers there, as in the police staff, will be doing the right thing. And I think there was quite a lot of robust discussion, but I think there's more to be done to make sure that this is what's actually planned. And I don't think there was anything done in bad faith. I think it was all presented in good faith. There was robust challenge. I think members just wanted more information on behalf of everyone across Gloucestershire.
Thank you so much. That was class. Councillor Davis, would you like to? She's not, but I'd be interested to. You're not strictly on the committee, but feel free to, give it a go. This is a slightly extraordinary day, so yeah, if you want to see, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Wimlam. That was a really comprehensive overview. I just had a question. Please tell me if this is not allowed. But with regards to the riots and things that were sort of being discussed, I've had some feedback from local residents around a Facebook group, Cheltenham Notice Board, which has like loads of different members, and there's loads of rumours around why this exists, and whether or not this is something that we could look into, or the Police and Crime Commissioner could look into.
Just to clarify, I've just had a quick conversation with Claire. Full respect, I know a lot of people have been concerned about this, but since it's a bit of an ongoing matter, we're not really able to talk about it at this time because there's still kind of current investigations. Is it okay if we leave this for the time being, and we can pick it up later when we've got more information? Does that sound okay? Okay, thank you so much for engaging with this, though. This has been a class. Okay, cool. So that's been, thank you so much to Councillor Willingham for pitching in on that. That's been really, really great. It's been good to have you here.
Questions on the report that Adrian submitted in advance?
That's a good question. Yeah, does anyone have any follow-up? Of course. So you're okay to take questions on it? That would be great. Amazing. Do you, can we ask Councillor Chellin to pitch in, please?
I just wanted to take the opportunity whilst Adrian was here to thank you for your comprehensive and diligent reports every single time at this committee. And yeah, just appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those kind comments. It is something I've spent the last 40 years dabbling in, so I suppose I've got a lot to say, really. I would like to highlight item 1.1 though. The cancer waiting times are truly appalling. I know it's a nationwide issue, but I've been shocked, having had a few years out of the system, to see how rapidly they've declined to a situation which would have been unthinkable certainly only 10 years ago. And I know we tend to obsess a little bit about A&E in Cheltenham because we're very protective of our own hospital, understandably. But fundamentally, it is about the services that we can get in Gloucestershire. And at the moment, those cancer services are not looking good. The ambulance waiting times, as we all know, are terrible. And the elective list is staggeringly high and only a fraction of need, because it's incredibly difficult to get onto an elective waiting list these days. A whole load of people are going privately, which is probably, given where we are, that's probably a good thing in many ways. But getting the health service back to a state, I mean, in this instance, I'm talking about the acute sector, but I'm sure that people with knowledge will be able to say exactly the same sort of thing about mental health services, about community services. So this, it's difficult to imagine something that's got so much worse in such a short period of time, and it doesn't feel to me there's been sufficient national debate and concern about it. Because just taking the cancer situation, the 62-day wait was put there for a very good clinical reason. If you waited longer than that, your chances of survival were lower, significantly lower. So that means there's a whole load of people who are having a much worse journey, a much slower journey, which is in itself difficult mentally, and then having worse outcomes, and obviously there will be more people dying. And just thought I'd make my feelings clear on that subject. Thanks.
Question on this feedback report. The question. Councillor Pinniger got a question.
Yeah, Councillor Pinniger and Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Councillor Bamford, for the report, and it is distressing news. I would like to somehow relate it to Cheltenham and the people of Cheltenham. So what does this mean? How many cancer patients do we have across the borough, and how many more won't be with us in 5 years' time? I'm sure you can't answer that, but I just wanted to make the point that it's real and local, and there'll be people that we know that this is affecting. So if you have any ideas of what we're talking, then that'd be interesting.
I'm not going to try and present figures here because they won't be accurate enough to be on record. But one of the big problems is that the amount of work that is now, first of all, there's a massive increase in the ageing population. Therefore, there's a massive increase in people with going through the cancer journey. Secondly, the range of treatment that's now available is massively more than it used to be. It's only, okay, it's 30 years ago. It feels relatively new to me still. That chemotherapy we didn't do chemotherapy, we only did radiotherapy. Now there are huge ranges of chemotherapies, and you have first line, you have second line, third line, fourth line. It's great that people are living to that, and many people actually die of something completely different. So that's wonderful, but it has meant that, and this probably applies to pretty much every other specialty you could think of as well. There is so much more that can be done. The worry to me is that the NHS used to be the place where people came from all over the world to see how on earth we managed to provide the standard for services to such a broad range of people in the country. What's happening now is almost the exact opposite. So why are you doing so badly? There's no quick answers to that, and it would be. I think it would be good to make it more tangible and just get a feeling on how many people are suffering, and I'll take that away and have a think about that and put it in my next report. But just to say that's it's not that there's still the same people delivering those services. They just haven't grown anything like quickly enough to meet what's happening. And whereas other countries have managed to do that, so we've got to consider really what it is that we've done wrong in not keeping up that standard.
Would you like to go ahead, Councillor Smith?
Yeah, just to pick up on yours, Adrian, it's wonderful. With related to cancer, I've been trying to do a project that I've got from the NHS that 24.6% of the population of Gloucestershire suffer with prostate cancer. Now that's alarming when you think about it. But talking to doctors, their reaction to it all is we're doing what we can. Unfortunately, the National Health Service was done in 1940s and they haven't caught up to the 21st century. It's government issues that should be sorting this out, and it's just a thought that, you know, the government should, it's not down to necessarily the doctors or the people that's trying to cure us. It's down to government supplying the facilities and the money to help them do this job. But, you know, it's an old system, unfortunately.
Yes, and there is no doubt that resources are a massive issue, and staff recruitment, staff, all of those things we can run through. There are national shortages in many of those areas. However, there are some unique circumstances within Gloucestershire. We have got a very unusual service, and we're effectively trying to provide a district hospital across 2 sites 9 miles apart, which is like there aren't many places like that in the country. But there are some very specific things that I think we, particularly as a HOSC, and therefore, you know, your input for me going to HOSC, there's a lot of local things that could ensure we give a better service. So I think we need to, you know, still try and keep it at the forefront of our minds. You know, what is it exactly we think? It's very important to the people of Cheltenham that they have a really good district general hospital. What does that mean? How can we help to ensure that we express to them what it is possible, and what it is, you know, and get back from them what they're concerned about. So I know people are really concerned about A&E. We've got to try and temper that a little bit and make sure they understand fully how bad other things are, and start worrying about those a bit more, and start pushing us, you know, to ensure those are properly resourced. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Councillor Bamford. That's given us a lot to think about, actually. It's really good to hear from you about this. So just because it's coming close to 8 o'clock now and we're going to get shooed out of the building with a broom, I'm just going to move out onto the next agenda. God, that sounded awful, didn't it? I'm sorry. Didn't know I could do that. Okay. So just briefly, item 11, updates from the Scrutiny task groups. So this brings me back to my first meeting as chair. We set up a Scrutiny task group on the CBH to CBC transition. So we actually have now produced a final report, which is really exciting. I hope you guys have all enjoyed reading it. The committee, the Scrutiny task group have all fed in onto it, and we're quite happy with the work that's been carried out. We're hoping that it's kind of made the transition more robust, and that it's kind of drawing in lots of different strands. It's been a really exciting piece of work, and I feel quite pleased that we've been able to conduct it in the way that we have. Just wanted to do a particular shout out, just thanking everyone who participated in the Scrutiny task group, because all their contributions were amazingly helpful. Having the officers who are involved on it as well, their expertise was incredibly valuable. The calibre of the kind of engagement we were having, the expertise was like really stunningly good. So it was a real pleasure being a part of it as well. We also just briefly mentioning Councillor Baker's comments, who just since he took the time to kindly feedback directly, he said that he believes our engagement was helpful. Many of our comments were definitely taken aboard, especially in relation to tenant engagement. Going forward, the need to retain staff and high standards set in the main by CBH, we're hoping will be carried forwards. We have been raising concerns about antisocial behaviour, you know, same as it ever was really, being one of the main sources of complaints. So we're kind of hoping that we might be able to continue a focus on that. But otherwise, like, genuinely quite excited to sort of see where things go next. I'd be happy to take any questions on it in particular, but I'd also like to invite Councillor Hay to make a comment on it as well, if you so choose.
Tabby, I have to say I didn't hear everything that you said. You were talking quite fast and I couldn't follow it. So, but you, in terms of the scrutiny report, and as I said when I did the briefing, in terms of the housing handover, I think I was just looking at your work plan and thinking, you know, the follow-up, whilst it's the work, it's the follow-up perhaps in a year's time, a year on from where we've come from and your involvement there, and then in a year's time an update of where we are on that. You know, the scrutiny might actually genuinely find, you know, the input that you could have on that I don't know. I'll leave that with you. But and the ASB is, of course, you know, the work that some of the scrutiny members and the input to actually say that antisocial behaviour is not actually a borough council function largely. It is, you know, there are bits of it that are, but actually it's criminal damage. It isn't, you know, that causes criminal damage that causes antisocial behaviour and offence to others. It's very different. So it was good to see that the Police and Crime Commissioner came up with a pot of money. And so it's good to see that focus. And we've all got a part to play in that, haven't we? Because it's about actually tracking and identifying where that is and feeding it back in as things move forward. You know, we'll be the eyes and ears. Well, we've already got the bid ambassadors who do that constantly. So those are all really good positives, I thought. I don't know if you've got any questions for me, that's fine.
That's absolutely perfect, thank you. Because like personally, like I am really excited to continue on this ongoing relationship, and of course every member of Overview and Scrutiny is very welcome to keep on contributing towards the journey, because it's going to be very iterative. It's kind of just having an ongoing conversation, really, and you're right about the antisocial behaviour not being fully our remit, but just having spoken to CBH operatives who kind of are very well placed to notice patterns arising, having attended comprehensive anti-exploitation training as well, which feeds into that very, very closely. There's a lot of people who are very invested in their, you know, working productively with residents, and it's genuinely really exciting that they want to ensure that investment is kind of on a very continuity basis, and just making sure that we have these early interventions in place, so ideally ASB doesn't arise at all. So, you know, this is, like I said, quite an exciting time. Councillor Took, would you like to make a contribution?
Yes, I'd love to. Just one point of detail. If you look at the Metropolitan Police website, it's very specific about what antisocial behaviour is, and indeed what it isn't. Antisocial behaviour is not criminal damage. Criminal damage is different. Tagging is criminal damage, and criminal damage is the responsibility of the police. Just to be really clear.
Thanks for the clarification on that. Is everyone else fairly happy with that? Again, feel free to ask me questions at a later date if you so choose, but otherwise I'm happy to leave that there. So another point just to bring to your attention, just generally, we have item 12, we have been reviewing the scrutiny work plan. Again, this is a project I've been really excited to be a part of. We don't have to make a decision on it, but I'm assuming that you've all had a look at it and you're quite happy with it, because all of you have actually contributed to it, which is, I'd like to say thank you for that. If you do have any further comments or ideas of things that you'd like to draw in, there's no pressure to do it now, but again, hit me up if there's anything that you'd like to suggest, because it'd be really good to draw that into the work that we're doing. So I think, Councillor Took, go ahead.
Sorry, when I was a member of this committee before, as opposed to now, when I'm just standing in, I did ask 2 years ago that a work stream would be done on access for people with disability. 2 years later, it didn't happen. Is it on here now? It was promised.
We have been examining sort of ways to do that across a number of different streams. So we've been trying. Oh, sorry.
Carry on, Tabby. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is something that we really wanted to prioritise. We were kind of examining it as part of EDI, so equality, diversity and inclusion, just because it's quite unusual in some ways for accessibility to just be kind of isolated as like a particular demographic thing. There's so much intersectionality about it.
Can I help? Oh, can I just help?
Yeah, for sure.
I might just be able to say something that might help, that's all. Yeah, so you're right, and obviously we brought the ED&I policy, and members obviously contributed into that, so thank you for that. And we've actually been out doing public consultation on that, and we've Accessibility Forum, for example, have been commenting on that. We had some of you went to the Party in the Park event. We had little cards with a QR code so people could scan it and go and look at our policy and provide feedback. So we've been actively doing that. As part of that, we've also developed an action plan, and we have a specific piece of work in the action plan that focuses purely around accessibility. So it hasn't been forgotten, it's in there, it's just working its way through the action plan. And as soon as I can't remember what the timescale is, but it's not been forgotten, just to give you some assurance.
Cool. Do we have any other questions relating to the work plan, or are we good? Okay, cool. Just checking out my agenda. I think that's just about everything for today, really. So item 13 is any other item that Chair determines to be urgent, and there doesn't seem to be anything. So item 14 is that the date of our next meeting will be Monday, 21st of October at 6 p.m. By all means, if anyone wants to submit any questions, if any committee members would like to submit questions ahead of time, they'd be very welcome. Just check out the agenda a week before the meeting, and then email Democratic Services with any questions you have. Thank you so much for coming today. This has been really good. Have a great evening.